how it all went south.
Okay, Sean. So we've had quite a few adventures. There's just something about gangsters, right? I don't know what the appeal is, but I've been obsessed with this kind of enforcer gangster type story for a long time. So we're going to talk about that today. It's about Eddie Guyol. This story happened, it came to me a couple years ago. We went to a party, friends of ours, acquaintances of ours, kids were the same age, showed up at this party one night, really beautiful house. And just right around the corner in Morningside in Atlanta, what usually happens when I show up at these parties, someone wants to ask, what's the new podcast you're working on?
Yeah.
Hey, what are you working on? What's the new thing?
Yeah.
And I was actually working on Gangster House at that time. It was about Mike Thievis, the porn king of Atlanta. He had his own issues, kind of a classic 70s story. And that always starts other conversation at the party. And
I bet it does.
yeah, it does, for sure. And the owner of the house, Cindy, says to me, well, you should know that a big-time gangster used to live in this house back in the 1930s. And in fact, he was murdered in the driveway. And it is a really famous case that not a lot of Atlantans know about. I got to tell you about it. And so I was instantly fascinated. And I hadn't even launched Gangster House yet. And I'm thinking franchise. Like, wow, this is going to be great. This is season 2 already. So my mind was racing, and it just really kicked into gear when I got home, me wanting to know what that story was all about. So this man was named Eddie Guyol, and on April 23rd, 1935, she told me he was gunned down in the driveway of their house. He was named the millionaire racketeer, Eddie Guyol, a famous guy from the 30s.
I thought you were going to say he was named Millionaire Racketeer of the Year.
Yeah, right.
1935.
Well, there was a lot of candidates for sure. And in the course of discovering information about this man, Eddie Guyol, I stumbled on another legendary story that we'll talk about Al Capone and his time in Atlanta. So it's a full-on gangster episode, and there's a lot to talk about. So I kind of considered this the story of the original gangsters of Atlanta.
Yeah, and you don't really think about gangsters in that way, like the traditional Al Capone kind of guys. You don't think about that at least I don't in Atlanta.
Most people don't know what happened to him after he was actually, sent off, after he was convicted on tax evasion and fraud and all that. So what happened to him? So this story kind of hit where the zeitgeist in Atlanta and became something else. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So live from 800 Studios here in Atlanta, this is how it all went south. Let's get into it. So in the era of Prohibition, gangsters had to find a new way to make money. There was another type of hustle going on that threw cash to those sitting at the top of the pyramid. And it was a numbers game. So before we had Powerball and Mega Millions and all this lottery stuff televised, big drawings of $1 billion, it was a numbers game known in Atlanta as the bug. And this is what the Prohibition era folks were doing when they couldn't run that all the time. And so Eddie Guyol was the top man of the numbers runners. And at that time in 1935, he employed 20,000 runners and brought in $50,000 a day for their efforts, nearly 100.
In 1935.
In 1935.
That's such crazy money.
It's crazy money. So that would be $12 million a year in today's money. Like if it was still $50,000, throw in inflation, and it's epic. It's $279 million a year in today's money. And that's just huge.
Wow. That's crazy. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, and so Eddie Guyol, despite all of this, despite sitting on the top of the pyramid of this numbers racket, he was a pretty kind of, people didn't know who he was until he was gunned down that one day in his driveway. And so the legend of Eddie Guyol is mainly a story that's been untold, even today. And despite some pretty fantastic headlines, intrigue, and that true gangster lifestyle of the 30s playing out on a national stage, I just really hadn't found that much information on him. But if you go back and you look at the archives of the coverage, he's all over the papers, not only in Atlanta, but nationally. As we dive deeper into Guyol's story, we'll also stumble across another legend from the time, Al Capone. Yes, that Al Capone, who with his wife was said to have come and gone as he pleased while on lockdown for crimes he committed back in Chicago. He was shipped to Atlanta and was ready for an 11-year sentence. And exactly what he did here is what I discovered as I did a deep dive. And so we will get into Al Capone as we get into this story also. In a 1938 article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, Larry Logston kicks off his lengthy piece about Eddie Guyol with the following. I love this. Quote, history students of the year 2000 AD will look back in amazement on the criminals of the Prohibition era, whose power and wealth earned them the nickname of racketeer barons. And among those underworld multimillionaires, many of who dominated great cities, Eddie Guyol, racket czar of Atlanta, Georgia, undoubtedly will be remembered as the oddest of all. For Guyol never caused a murder or even had a man beaten up. But that didn't save him.
Yeah, and I love that in the year 2000,
yes,
when they have flying cars.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That $12 million a year business, if you want to call it that, was no protection for him being gunned down at the age of 37. And it was just done right outside his new mansion. So what's interesting is he started his fortune in the Prohibition era in Atlanta, Georgia, under the wings of a man named Walter Cutliff. And Eddie grew his business as a bootlegger. And yes, he would even get caught by the law. He served on a chain gang, but he never spent a day in prison. But that prohibition bootlegging, the two partners, Cutliff and Guyol, they were making $2,000 to $5,000 a week. It was not bad. They actually called him the liquor king before he was the numbers king. Right here. Yeah.
But we've got the liquor king, the numbers king, the porn king. We've got a lot of kings that have been mentioned in this episode already. We're only
I know, right?
minutes in.
Guyol was the connection point to the numbers racket from New York coming to Atlanta. And so he actually made much of his profits from the African American community. Guyol and Cutliff would employ writers across the city, and they would hit key employees in places like hotels, newsstands, taxi services, stuff like that to help run the system. And his headquarters was called the Home Office. And like I said before, his organization grew to between 15 and 20,000 members. And in Atlanta, it was called the Bug. And that Philly piece that I described earlier, they said it was called the Bug only here.
Yeah, I'm gonna sound like the most non-true crime knowledgeable person ever, but I've never truly understood what it means to run numbers.
So that's actually
which is why I could never be a career criminal if I don't know the most basic. Like I know what laundering money is, right? But I don't know what running numbers are. Yeah, I mean, I had to look it up.
Are you the laundry king?
I swear to God, yeah, I had to actually look up like what is really laundering money? Like, it has nothing to do with cleaning it.
Well, it does. You've got to clean the money.
Yeah, the proverbial clean the money, but
yeah. So how did it all work? So the modern day lottery system, of course, is monitored by accountants and outside officials and very highly guarded. But the racket was really something that was run on the streets, again, collected in places like hotel lobbies and other places of business and in local neighborhoods. So buyers would place their bets on a string of numbers, and of course they would win if they matched. But how did they pick these numbers? And it would be from a random set from treasury reports, baseball scores, and other statistics from newspapers, and the winning numbers would match. Now, I'm not sure that it was ever really fair, of course, because someone has to win and someone has to lose, but it was huge and it was nearly untrackable, unlike when a bootlegger was busted for carrying alcohol, right? And it was insanely profitable to those at the top. So the Home Office, the one run by Guyol and Cutliff, was one of 4 syndicates operating numbers rackets in Atlanta, and easily the most popular of the 4. But yes, they took in $50,000 overall from all the bets that were coming in. And the less winners there were, the more the two kept for themselves. So you can see how this would go.
Yeah.
So they were the organizers. We don't exactly know how the numbers were manipulated or officially picked. Again, they said from newspapers, from all these like different random places. But how random are these things without controls?
Yeah. And when you're going, well, we got a $50 winner over here, and we're going to keep the rest. Yeah. Better luck next time, guys.
So the night of the murder, Guyol and his wife Myrtle were set to go to the theater in 1935. And as they walked out to the car, a man came out from the bushes and said, "Eddie, you know you've got this coming." And so my question is, how do they know he said that? Are they like podcast boom mics in the bushes, or who knows who this is and how this happened? But that is the legend of there was a man in the bushes right by the driveway, and I can see that picture in my head, and they just nailed him. And so,
did he die right away? I mean, was he killed instantly, like on the spot?
2 shots were fired, and the bullet went through his cheek and into his brain, and he was instantly killed. And he slumped over the steering wheel, and his wife Myrtle ducked while the fire was coming in. And what's also interesting is Eddie had $2,500 in his pocket. I don't carry $2,500 in my pocket today.
Yeah.
That's what he had. That money was not taken. Myrtle had expensive jewelry, and the man didn't take that either. So it was. I mean,
it wasn't a robbery. They were get this guy out of the game.
Definitely a hit.
So the wife lived.
The wife lived.
Okay, that's how she knows. We know what he said.
We'll get to the wife in a little bit too.
There's more.
So Eddie Guyol, yes.
Here I thought I had figured out this.
Yeah.
I was like,
Sean, we talked about spoilers. You're not going to step on the stories. You're going to step on my jokes.
I didn't step on anything.
Okay.
I was
just keep laughing, Shane. Anyway, so he died at that night at the hospital. And the Atlanta Constitution's main headline the next morning said, "Eddie Guyol, Atlanta's numbers game leader, slain in racket killing in fashionable section." So now I know I live in a fashionable section of town. This is confirmed. I've never thought of it as a fashionable section. It's a nice, you've been there. This is a great part of town, but
what's your address again?
Yeah. Okay, so the death of Eddie Guyol.
Last 4 of social?
Yeah,
please?
yeah, it's sure. So the death of Eddie Guyol would become a nationwide story, and detectives would work to try to solve this case, but had no leads for months. And despite his massive influence as this racketeer, no one knew why he was murdered. And so Cutliff, his partner, was now at the top of the organization by himself, and he received his own warning when a man called the house and told his wife what happened Tuesday night might happen again. The investigation has gone on for a bit. That night, actually, a man named Lieutenant C.E. McCrary showed up, and he had arrived at the scene with 2 cars full of officers. But they didn't really have much to go on other than seeing Guyol dead in the driveway in the car. And despite him being on the case and his position on the force, he said he had no idea that Guyol was the leader of the numbers racket. So this is all news to him. And then I read this side piece that I guess I believe, but it's so outrageous in modern times, that there was a woman theory that was thrown around. And the language of the time to describe why this could never be possible was absurd. In the Atlanta Journal, just 2 days after the murder, Cutliff said, "That slug came out of a .45, and that is too heavy for a woman. Not 1 out of 1,000 women would use a gun that big. Besides, a woman would have more likely dropped the gun."
Yeah, there's old 1935's
rearing its head.
For you. Yeah.
Because those guns, you can barely pick them up with your... it's outright. I mean, it just makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
This isn't...
It just goes to the way that, like, it was things were thought about women at the time, which is so crazy. But there's some element of, I don't want to say truth to that because that's not the right way to put it, but a woman typically probably wouldn't have, you know what I mean? It was like if they were going to use a gun, they probably would have used something smaller. So there's some kind of like, I get the thinking there,
yeah,
but completely ridiculous nonetheless to say that it's impossible.
It's not like picking up a bazooka.
Right,
fire it.
You're not picking up an M16 and...
So, I mean, unfortunately, the case was cold for months, And Lieutenant McCrary was on another case in Birmingham, Alabama, and discovered that one of the two men he was set to interview may have been connected to the murder of Eddie Guyol also. That they may have fled from Atlanta to Birmingham, Alabama, after the murder of Guyol. And so what Lieutenant McCrary did is he searched pawn shops in the Birmingham area looking for the .45 pistol that would match the type that was used to kill Guyol, of course. And despite no matches in any of the shops, he got a second tip that a man named Odie Fluker had made a trade and secured the .45. So this is where I pause and we talk about legendary Southern criminal names.
You always look out for somebody named Odie.
Odie Fluker. What are some of the guys that were part of the Dixie Mafia crew?
Not Odie Fluker, but it might as well have been. He fit right in.
He fits in, right?
Yeah. Billy Wayne Davis, Billy Sunday Burt. You got Gaddis. There's names that Southern crime names.
Names.
If you're born with a certain name in the South, it's like you're probably gonna end up in at least moonshine. Maybe card games and a little worse, but
Odie Fluker just stuck out to me.
You're not an attorney.
I instantly thought of all the names from the Dixie Mafia and In the Red Clay, for sure. McCrary asks the man who had made the trade with Fluker if he had ever fired any test shots of the gun before the trade. And in fact, he said, yes, I did. In my backyard are bullets in a tree in the backyard. I fired it and they found them. So the FBI went, pulled the bullets out, and matched those bullets from the tree to the gun that Odie Fluker had in his possession. So the headline in the Charlotte Sunday Observer on January 3rd, 1937, and it's a long one, getting into the prose of the time, this crack detective wouldn't say quits. And the strong case of circumstantial evidence he built by dogged devotion to details that satisfied the jury. That he had answered the question, who killed the millionaire racketeer? It's a fantastically long headline and a story done by Jack Martin, whose byline calls him a, quote, distinguished crime reporter. So you see this guy, right? He's the gumshoe.
Oh, yeah. I see the little fedora and the...
Yeah, like it feels like I'm reading...
I got a story for you, Jack.
Yeah, and so he puts that in his byline in the paper. It's just of the time, and it actually feels like a movie script, right?
Yeah.
So...
Very 30s.
His flair is also evident as he describes the, quote, $250,000 brick and marble castle in the heart of Atlanta's swankiest neighborhood.
$250,000?
Correct.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you just look at I don't know what the inflation rate is. You probably calculated it out from then till now, but that is...
So not only do I now live in the most fashionable section of Atlanta, I also live in the swankiest. I'm just saying.
I mean... We might have to adjust this split. Here I am. I was like, man, $2,000 to $5,000 a week, man. All right.
That's just on liquor.
I'm gonna have to. I got a bootleg out of the back of my car in the parking lot here after I'm done this.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to make ends meet. Yeah,
so much, and we're gonna open a laundromat. So there's that.
Yeah, well. Here I am washing money. No, the ink just keeps coming off. What am I doing wrong?
I got a new HP printer. I mean,
yeah.
The police had found their man, and Myrtle Guyol, Eddie's wife, identified Fluker in photos and in a lineup. Now, it had been over a year since the murder, and Myrtle was now in a, quote, better position to identify the killer. And she went down to the Fulton County Jail and positively identified Odie Fluker as the killer. So Fluker went on trial and was convicted in Eddie Guyol's murder. The New York Daily News proclaimed, as matters stand, Odie Fluker undoubtedly killed Eddie Guyol. Motive, robbery. Let's take a break. Odie Fluker maintained his innocence and said he had been framed. Fluker said Lieutenant McCrary was behind it all, and it was a setup, saying that McCrary's motivation to become chief of police was the main reason he was facing the electric chair. Fluker claimed that when Guyol's wife Myrtle saw him in the lineup with 6 or 7 others down at the station, he was the only one wearing a coat and hat, which made it easier for him to be picked out of the lineup.
Just like the guy in the lineup that has the Hamburglar outfit on, and he's like, "Oh, of course it's me. This system's rigged."
It's like Kramer turning the other way in the lineup.
Yeah.
Little fashion show.
Yeah.
On May 7th, 1937, the Atlanta Journal newspaper had a huge photo of the Hindenburg explosion, legendary photo, with a headline, "German Queen of Skies explodes, burns while mooring at Lakehurst." In the third column on the same first page is an intriguing story about Eddie Guyol again. An affidavit was filed claiming that it was Myrtle who had offered up $10,000 to kill her husband, and that it was later boosted to $20,000 by none other than Walter Cutliff, his partner in the bug.
It's always the dame. It's always the dame.
The dame and the partner, right?
The dame and the partner. You got to look out for them.
Police Chief Hornsby said, "There is something rotten in this Fluker case, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it if possible." He was confronted with a death sentence in the electric chair 5 times, but he was not electrocuted. And upon a 6th chance, he eventually had his sentence commuted to life in prison, and then he actually ended up getting out of prison and was free in 1950. Many of the higher-ups in the system believed Fluker had been framed. In his 15-year fight to clear his name, Fluker was defended by members of the police department, a Superior Court judge, and even Governor Rivers ordered the sentence commuted to a life sentence, like I said, stating that there were conflicting circumstantial evidence and questionable character witnesses. So, did Fluker kill Eddie Guyol, with the case solved by that amazing investigative and detective work of the Atlanta Police Department, or was this an inside job? We may never know.
So there was never anything more to the wife paying money or offering. It was just something that was thrown out there.
It was in the front lines of the paper, but they just could not pin it back to her. I mean, when dirty money's traveling 10,000 here, 10,000 there, and you're already dealing with the seediest of criminals, who knows what happened?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I want to say like in the 30s and in that time, right? When you saw something in the newspaper, it's not like today. And I see, it's not that there could have been a headline or information that was not accurate or wrong in a newspaper at that time, but it's not like today you can just put whatever the fuck you want out there.
Right.
For the most part, you know what I mean? Like, oh, that's not right. Sorry. We'll okay, let me change that. But back then it was like people went the distance to try to get accurate information out, because that was it. A newspaper in the 30s was like how the world.
Yeah. And it was.
So my point in that is like, you want to kind of look at that and go, there's probably some real reason why that accusation was made.
So I agree with you partly, but I had a lot of questions about reading some of the facts that were put in the paper by these fantastic, crime writers with the wonderful bylines, and the way they wrote the headlines, that they were almost writing a movie script. And I wasn't really sure how much of the information that I had heard was actually true. So I called Scott, who's the owner of the house. He still lives there. And I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he shared some information with me about the house and what the real story was about the value of the house, what really happened. And it's awesome, and it's fascinating. So let me get into this. So Eddie Guyol bought the property as an empty lot, and he custom designed the house. He paid $10,000 for the lot originally. And so there's no way that this house was worth $250,000 or even $50,000 back in 1935. It ain't happening, and I'll share why. There's also some really incredible unique features in the house, including a trapdoor. The trapdoor in the living room led to a closet in the basement, which then had a hidden door that turned to a safe. So obviously they're trying to stash money and have all kinds of escape routes. It was rumored to have tunnels in the front and back of the house under the yard that would hit nearby where Wildwood Park is today. It also appears that you drive in to the driveway, the garage would be there. You could drive all the way through the driveway, the garage, and there would be another exit on the other side. So if you're looking to escape,
Right.
if someone's coming after you, there's actually about 8 different escape routes. There's a roundabout right next to the house right now. There's all these like back roads and escape routes that you can get away pretty quickly on. So when he built this house, there's a certain intentionality to the location of the house, but also the things inside the house where he wanted to keep things hidden.
Sure, yeah.
It's amazing.
If you live that life where you have the constant threat of being raided or having, your house searched,
Yeah.
you've got to have hidden places.
Yeah.
Hidden safes and trapdoors and false doors and all that kind of stuff.
Again, it feels like it's something out of the movies, right?
Yeah.
So the house is 1 block from where William Hartsfield lived of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. After the murder during World War II, it acted as a boarding house for 8 or so Lockheed workers that had been working on bombers. And in 1946, the house sold for $14,000. Again, busting the myth of the house's value at $250,000, printed in that newspaper, right? Making this into the castle.
But was it, in its day, though, was it like it had the marble and the,
there's no
fancy schmancy stuff in it?
Yeah, but there's just no way. Like there's no way that house, no matter what you put in it, the size of the house.
Yeah.
The house is.
I'm picturing like a massive palatial
No.
mansion. Like that's
No.
what I'm picturing.
No, it's probably, if I was to guess, and I'll look up this, it's probably 3,000 to 4,000 square feet.
Yeah. Okay, so that's big, but it's not like
Yeah.
a 12,000 square foot mansion.
Yeah. It was not that. Isaac Hayes, chef from South Park, was rumored to have lived there in the 70s. Theme song from Shaft, etc. That's also really cool. Scott thought that was cool too. And Scott said the dog would get spooked sometimes by an unknown presence, maybe a ghost. And one day they moved a cross out of their bathroom. And he said things did not go well for the next month. Like at their life, their home, everything was a disaster. So they moved the cross back into the bathroom, and things have been fine the last 13 years.
Wow. What I would be doing is just like searching that house left and right for like hidden stashes of money. Like there's got to be some gold bars stashed in the basement somewhere.
I'm going to get to that. So
if you tell me they found gold bars in the basement.
So Cindy, Scott's former wife, that night she told me about, kind of all this secret stuff. She didn't know much about Eddie Guyol's backstory, but we went downstairs, and it's now a finished basement, and there was an empty spot in the middle with a finished wall, and she believed that this empty spot was where there was a safe at one time, but it was now long gone. The great blog History Atlanta describes the house as having many trapdoors and secret compartments. I went home the next night, and of course I was obsessed about this, but especially these tunnels, because they had never looked or done anything about those tunnels. And I couldn't show up at Scott and Cindy's place and say, would you mind if I dig up your front yard or your backyard, because I want to see if you actually have tunnels there? So I actually started calling around Georgia Tech and some other universities to see if they had kind of ground penetrating radar or super special machines that could actually scope this thing. And for whatever reason, I never pursued it, again, because you get busy or whatever. But I had real phone calls thinking I was going to show up at their house and start looking for shit.
With a pickaxe slung over your shoulder.
Yeah, seriously. But I thought better of it and backed off. So
it's probably a good thing for your friendship with those folks.
Yeah, exactly. I recently drove by the house again, because it's around the corner. And I looked at the driveway and thought, 90 years ago, 100 years ago, a man was capped in this, in the driveway in the front yard of this place, and all the people driving by have no idea.
Man, that's nothing, Jason. I drove down just to get here. I got off the freeway. I probably passed by 5 places where somebody got capped. It's Hotlanta, man.
This is true. But you didn't know about.
They don't have the cool backstory, but people getting capped, man.
This is true. All right, let's take another break. All right, Sean. So speaking of gangsters, who is the most well-known gangster that you can think of from the 20s and 30s?
Definitely Al Capone.
Yeah, obviously the biggest.
I think he's the most famous gangster ever.
Super famous, convicted of tax fraud. But I would argue that most people today don't know that he was shipped to the Atlanta pen to serve an 11-year sentence after he was convicted.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's this story that's been lurking around Atlanta for years that despite being sent to Atlanta to spend time behind bars, Capone was able to come and go as he pleased while here in Atlanta. The rumors have included having a suite at the Briarcliff Summit to renting out the top floor of the notorious Claremont Hotel. And anyone that knows Atlanta, the Claremont Lounge is in the back. It's one of the seedy, notorious strip club places.
People that are in Atlanta right now that are listening or in this area are going, that place. But if you're not from Atlanta, the Claremont is like where it's such a fun place. I don't want to give it a bad name, but it's kind of like where if you're a stripper and there's nowhere else that'll hire you, you can always get a job at the Claremont.
Yeah.
At the Claremont.
Yeah.
I will say this though, they redid the whole hotel, and the rooftop bar there has probably one of the best views of Atlanta. I was there the other night.
Yeah, you were. That's right. Yeah. It's right up from Pont City Market if you've come to Atlanta and you know where that is. It's right off the Beltline. And that strip of Ponce de Leon Avenue was super seedy. Claremont was actually pretty much abandoned for a number of years, and a bunch of, I mean, it looked terrible if you look at the photos online.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was kind of half condemned, but such a fun place, though. I don't want to give that place a bad name because it is like if you're hanging out with friends, guys or girls, whatever, it's just like it's
rooftop bar. There's a restaurant downstairs.
Yeah, I mean the Claremont, like the strip club. It's just such a fun, like weird vibe. It's
kind of a must. You have to go, and it's not. You know,
I know where we're going for lunch.
Yeah, that's right. The buffet is fantastic. Other stories include that Capone had dug tunnels from the Claremont Hotel to the Highland Inn, Highland Avenue. So this is fascinating to me, again, because it's in the neighborhood, and I run every morning 4.2 miles in an oval loop right in the heart of Midtown, and I run by these places every single day. So I see the Highland Inn. It's been renamed, I think it's like the Owl Inn. And to think that Al Capone would be running around the neighborhood at the time and dug these tunnels it's fascinating to me.
I just pictured Al Capone in his little like running shorts with the sweat headband. Like he's just doing his morning jog. He's not running around that way. He was like in a suit with a Tommy gun under his.
Yeah.
Going, I got to be back at prison in 12 hours, like.
Well, it's time to bust the myth of this story. When the Claremont Hotel went up for sale in 2013, a bunch of websites and, of course, reporters behind the articles once again brought up the story of Al Capone and him being at the Claremont Hotel and being out and about. And so, unfortunately, the story was entirely made up by a man named Matt Monroe, who had confidently spread the lies working as a bartender at some of the local establishments. It was, as it always has been, an urban legend. So he wanted to see how far he could have the story travel. And it worked. The Bitter Southerner, a classic publication about life here in the South, they also jumped in. That maybe you heard it from a friend of a friend, that Capone drank in nearby bars and that he was still running the mob from prison. And I actually found myself believing it when I first heard it, especially because it was so close to my home. And so part of the fun of the story is almost that it does seem plausible, while feeling unbelievable at the same time.
So was he was in prison here, but he wasn't like free to come and go?
No.
I mean, that would be the only part of the story where I was like, there's a part of me that could kind of believe some of that, though. I know. Just in that time and being who he was.
So the thing that doesn't smell right to me is
the Claremont.
Yeah, the Claremont. But the distance from the Claremont to the Highland Inn it's about a half mile, let's say.
It's a long
You're not digging tunnels.
Yeah.
The Freedom Parkway runs right through that right now. There's just no way possible. So that was the thing that said, I think
would have found
that's such a cool detail and that specific, but there's just no way. So that busts the myth.
But that whole tunnel thing with Gangsters, that is so believable because in Lake Tahoe, the Rat Pack and those guys and Gangsters, Capone, all those people used to hang out there. I mean, that's why this whole it's not an urban legend, but so many bodies have been disposed of in Lake Tahoe because it's so deep. It's like as deep as the Empire State Building. in the middle.
No way.
And there are, the casinos and stuff where Sinatra and those guys used to go hang out, and you have that legend of him being tied in with mobsters and
Never heard that.
you never heard that?
I've heard it.
I was gonna say, I was like, you can't look up a mobster story or anything about Frank Sinatra without seeing that. But there are tunnels from those hotels to different places in Tahoe. There actually are.
What is our fascination with gangsters? What is it about them that appeals to us? Is it the danger side? Is it the things we don't have access to? What is it?
I don't know. I think part of it too is just, what you see a gangster on TV in a movie. Hollywood gangsters are so different, especially from like that time period where it's just that film noir vibe with the hat and well dressed and walking into any place and being recognized and feared and respected all at the same time,
They did dress better than we do today.
Sure.
We're walking around in sweatpants and flip-flops, and they've got the full-on suit and the fedora hat, and the whole thing is awesome. I wish we did a little bit more of that today.
Yeah, and it's just culturally, the dress, the style, the whole thing. It's been ingrained in our probably subconscious or in our in the back of our minds since forever, right? Gangsters of the 30s and 40s have been popular since the 30s and the 40s. Even the people of that time, it was like they were sort of rock stars in a weird way in their own time. So.
Well, this has been a fascinating episode for me to be able to tell this story finally after holding onto it for 5 years. Yeah. Both stories, really. The story of Eddie Guyol and this kind of legendary man that was gunned down in the driveway just blocks for me. But also to be able to kind of talk about Al Capone and this legend of Atlanta that wasn't true. I just love stories like this.
Yeah, and we really went off on a tangent with the Claremont and Lake Tahoe. We covered a lot of gangster Atlanta history.
Well, there's more to come, I promise. There will be future episodes that lean into this heavily. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.